Sorry. Hi folks, my name is Jim DiFrancesco. I'm the Director of HR. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how councils and boards might interact in regard to pastoral leadership, and especially and obviously as it applies to HR issues. There may be a number of areas where you will get involved, but some of the most obvious I've put here in my presentation. In a staffing process, for example, you guys might be subject matter experts, or you might provide general input as part of a council or a school board into the development of job descriptions. You might provide similar input into the development of key skill areas and help with putting together related interview questions. You may also have a role in an interview and selection process. If you were asked to participate, you'd be able to offer knowledge and culture of the parishes, history of a particular parish or location from an insider's perspective. And again, subject matter expert, if it were a technical position like a finance position, or general knowledge, so that folks could evaluate candidate responses and candidates overall. Another area where you might be able to add value would be in the onboarding process, which is sort of a fancy HR word for orientation, but it would be everything that's involved in the staffing process, and that you're getting the person in the door and active and productive. This could be formal, it could be informal, and it might be things like working as part of a multifaceted team to welcome new staff or possibly existing staff if they're changing roles, to help with training, and sometimes, like for example in a finance area, they might be involved, you might be involved in systems, you might be able to help folks understand collaborative systems or processes or just norms in the way that business has been done over time. And as always, model the welcoming and evangelization-centered focus at the heart of all collaborative activities. So those are a number of areas, but also in addition to the staffing process, the bigger overall arching piece is this idea of ensuring that everything is being done to pick the staff to fit and fulfill the mission as described in the pastoral plan versus developing a plan to fit the people. So that's a critical piece that I think we need to keep in mind. Oh, by the way, if you have questions, just jump in. We can do them at the end, but you can do them now as well if you'd like to. So a couple of thoughts from my perspective. Councils and boards are typically in advisory versus governing roles, and as such should not be perceived as driving leadership or HR actions. Councils and boards often have access to confidential information, as you well know, and councils and board members, by the nature of those things and their roles, are often perceived as wielding considerable power. So, a general thought, your statements and your actions will be very, very closely scrutinized by staff, parishioners, outsiders, and others. And so when HR issues happen that involve boards, these are the kinds of things I hear about. Board members, council members may be perceived as making statements related to staff performance, for example, or staff changes. So we hear about a restructuring before the pastor talks about a restructuring, or potential corrective action. So someone's having performance issues, and somehow we're hearing about that. Or potentially they may be perceived as breaching confidentiality in some way. It could be related to those previous ones or other ways. They could be perceived as making defamatory statements, or potentially undermining the pastor or another collaborative leader, or anything not consistent with any kind of statement not consistent with the nature of the evangelization, focus, disciples, and mission. So again, these can be very subtle. So someone comes to you and says, for example, pastor asked me about a budget thing, and he said it was discussed at a meeting, and the person says, we never talked about that. Subtle. I don't think there's any harm meant. But so then the person goes back and talks to the pastor and says, well, the finance council told me they never talked about that issue. My only thought is, these issues don't get to HR often, but when they do get to HR, and they're related to staff issues or staff concerns, which typically when they call me, they don't call me when things are going great. These are the types of things we hear about. Often they're perceived issues as opposed to real issues, but just from my perspective, as I thought about how you guys all interact from a leadership perspective. These are the kind of things that we often see in some of the areas to be cautious about. As simple as that. Are there any questions for me? Yes?
Is there a requirement for people at the archdiocese level or the collaborative level to sign a confidentiality agreement?
No, not today.
Should there be?
Yeah, you know, we have one at the Pastoral Center, which I think is a good idea, and if you guys wanted to adopt it, you could, and I think it'd be a good idea. Absolutely. It's not required at this point. There's a code of conduct document, which I'm getting a little off topic. You may have seen it's on the website. It's a 14-pager, so it's kind of an interesting one, where we actually ask you each year to make statements that say, I do not have conflicts in this area. We will be rolling that out at some point and asking folks, all levels of folks who work, including folks like yourself, to sign those. We haven't rolled them out yet. They're a protection for the parish and a protection for you as well, where you could declare any sorts of things you had that you thought might be conflicts. Get them out in the open so they don't come on back later and create an issue for you. But you made a very good point, and if your pastor is interested, we can get that, those docs over for you. Other questions or thoughts on HR issues? Okay, great, thank you. I don't know who's next, so I can't tell you.
This is going to wrap things up with that with our services that we'll want to do.
Great. Thank you, Jim. Just before we head into the segment with Jim Walsh on school boards, I just wanted to reflect on a comment that I heard earlier about standalone parishes. And I share in that comment, when I first started down this process and was involved with Father Soper in the implementation, I thought to myself, wow, a standalone, that's easy. Nothing has to change. But getting involved with the pastoral plan and understanding what new evangelization meant, I came to realize the parishes that are standalone may have the biggest struggle of all. Because people think, wow, I don't have to work with anybody, it's just us. But the whole point of this is changing how we do things. So it's going to be more of a challenge to get into the evangelization and change the way we deliver services and programs when you are a standalone. So I thought I'd share that with you because I, like the previous comment, I thought the same thing. But now I realize they will, as a standalone, will probably have more challenges in getting people to understand being a parish under the pastoral plan and new evangelization than those who now have to collaborate and start working in a different way. And I don't know, Janet, if you had any further comments on that, knowing that with the evangelization and the challenges that they face.
Hi, I'm Janet Benestad. I do, can you hear me?
Mike, you have to go to this mic.
I have to go to this mic. Two mics. Oh, okay. I'm Janet Benestad. I do faith formation and evangelization for the Archdiocese. That's an interesting comment. Yes, I think there are going to be many, many challenges that face both, collaboratives that have several parishes and collaboratives that are a standalone parish. Evangelization, as you know, is nothing new. It's as old as the faith itself. The church exists for evangelization. But when we talk about the new evangelization, we're talking about several things. For ourselves who are practicing Catholics, we're talking about deepening our faith. For those who have drifted away from the church, we're talking about extending the invitation for them to come back. And for those who've never met Jesus Christ, we're talking about extending the invitation to come to know Him for the first time. In our collaboratives, both those that involve several parishes and those that involve only one, we are going to be looking at the best ways to do that. And many of the best practices with regard to extending the faith and inviting people to the faith are new and different from what we've been doing. Obviously, if our numbers are declining, we have to do something about increasing those numbers. And the best way to do that is to say, what is the new evangelization? How do we do it in the best way? Even in a standalone parish, for example, you might be looking at a new way of structuring religious education, or some new practices with regard to the liturgy. Not that the faith has changed or that the liturgy has changed, but we're looking at the best practices now. You probably will be looking at a new program for marriage preparation or baptismal preparation. All of those things will be matters for you to consider in your local pastoral plan, as Sister Pat said. So it may very well be that for a standalone parish there will be challenges. One of the things that's going to happen is you won't have that other parish or those other parishes to measure yourself by, or to bounce off of, or to be creative, you know, in collaboration with other people. So it can be just as challenging. The interesting part is it can also be as you know, just as much fun, and can involve as much creativity if you approach it, you know, with that attitude that this is a real opportunity for growth and for deepening our faith and for conversion. So I would say that.
I suspect that this has already been defined, but the three major goals of the overall program: one, to deepen and activate our own faith, to bring back those who still call themselves Catholics and who have fallen away from the practice of the faith, and then to reach out to non-Catholics and evangelize them or bring them to the message of God. Are those the three major goals of the overall program?
Those are the three elements of the new evangelization. Yes, that's how they've been articulated by Pope John Paul II, who was the one who really developed this idea of requiring a new evangelization, because we're living in a time when so many people have drifted away from the faith.